Topic of today's instructional will be primarily focusing on how can we keep a opponent who's grounded on the ground and then looking to transition into our own offense. We won't talk too much about passing in this instructional. It's more going to be engaging, but this should help you in both regards. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about our opponent's posture. So this is going to be very important for us, especially as a top player, to interpret our opponent's posture and act on that, because this is going to determine what options we have and how we have to approach them. So first we'll start out discussing a seated position. So when my opponent's in a seated guard, from here, we have to understand what are the pros and cons of being here. So we'll first talk about the advantages. So understanding some of the advantages of him being in a seated position. One of the main advantages is he has a very good ability to be mobile. So what that means is two things. He's able to go side to side and back and forth like fairly easily, right? Like he butt scoots back, comes forward, and when he wants to circle, right? He's very able to do this, as well as his ability to move through different postures. So whether he wants to come up to his knees, it's very easy, as well as fall to his back. So understanding that when he's seated, there are a lot more options he has to transition to different movement patterns as well as different postures to attack. So he could easily get some form of 2-on-1 and pull into a supine position and start looking to get into offense. As well as from the exact same position, he could go in the complete opposite direction of coming up and coming to his knees and attacking a single leg. So this is going to have to elicit a greater degree of cautiousness from our end, because now that he has so many options, we have to approach this carefully and appropriately. Another thing that's very good about playing seated is that because his upper body is inherently closer to me than if he were supine, he has a better ability to hand fight. So from here, when I look to hand fight, he can look to engage in this hand fight almost on equal terms to me. I would say I still have the advantage since I have the mobility advantage in terms of moving. However, it's very easy for him to also get his own grips. And then the third thing, generally, in terms of what advantages he has, is he has a really good ability, especially depending on how he plays a seated position, to deny me leg grips or ankle grips. So this is very common when you go against a supine opponent, where you look to get grips on their legs and you can misdirect them. In seated, it becomes a fair bit harder, especially when he's an active hand fighter. They're actively hand fighting. When I look to get to his ankles, it becomes more and more difficult, and I put myself at risk to exposing myself to their attacks. So these are the main considerations we're going to have to go over when approaching a seated opponent. So we'll go over some attacks and the way we approach this later, but first we have to understand these positions. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about the risks associated with playing in a seated position. So like with everything, there are pros and cons. So one of the main risks when playing seated is that because his back is off of the mat, there's a much greater degree of back exposure, especially when I manage to get an angle. So if I were to get to a strong angle here, now our opponent, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, our opponent's put in a tough spot where he has the decision to either maintain a seated position, and now there's a degree of back exposure, or concede to his back, which is generally what we're going to want. So this is something that you'll see a lot of people do. You can do this in a more athletic manner or less athletic. You see people do backflips, but you can also use footwork and movement, which we'll discuss a little bit more later. Something that's also fairly risky when playing the seated guard is that he doesn't really have a good ability to carry my weight nor manage distance. There's some degree in which he's able to manage distance, right? If he steps on my shins, he can do this, but it's very easy for me to maneuver my way out of these things. So from here, the only way he has to manage distance is by using his own movement. So whether that be scooting backwards or circling, that's the best way he can go about doing this. But he actually doesn't really have a good ability to establish frames to keep me away, compared to a situation where if he were supine, when he's supine, he has much better frames. So from here, this could be risky, especially when we have a more aggressive approach to him, where it's much harder for him to actually push me away. Because from here, he puts himself almost at risk to conceding a poor position, because he doesn't really have a good base to push me forward. You'll see competitors like Marcelo, they'll lean very far forward, so when they're playing seated, to make it better or make it a lot easier for them to bear my weight, because now I drive into them, he's actually able to carry this. You see, he's putting his body in a position to bear weight. However, this leads us on to our final risk, is that the risk of the upper body. So same thing as before that we talked about. Because his upper body is inherently closer, one, he has a better ability to hand fight. However, he does put himself at risk to various forms of upper body tie-ups, whether it be snap downs, whether it be like various forms of underhooks, overhooks, etc., where now the top man could use this offensively. Obviously, it needs to be done appropriately. I can't just enter here and just overwrap and now he's just going to take me down.